All right, so we're speaking about this big idea of what's called self-abnegation, which in Hebrews may be bitul, also known as self-nullification. And that is that in order to truly connect with God, we have to put the ego aside and allow God to, in a way, flow through us. Now, this, as the Tanya mentions here, as Rabbi Schnetzler's commentary mentions, this is most dominant or apparent, at least, in Torah study. When I study Torah, I do have to put my own perceptions, my own way of thinking aside in order to understand God's words, which is what the Torah is. And therefore, it says that when a single individual sits and engages in the study of Torah, then God, the divine presence, dwells on him, right? So it's only that self-abnegation and that presence of God through self-abnegation comes into effect specifically during the study of Torah. But each time, it's not limited to the study of Torah, obviously. Each time a person can put his ego aside and ask not just what I want from God, but rather what God wants from me, then I'm able to draw down God's presence and become a vehicle to him and to his light, to his blessings and so on. So that's really the idea here. Let's continue where we left off, as you mentioned, Margot, page 165. To this, the Talmud. Does anyone want to read? Anyone?
I'll read.
Go ahead, Margot, please.
Okay. To this, the Talmud adds that whenever 10 Jews gather, the divine presence dwells upon them, even if they are not actually negating themselves to God by studying Torah. 10 Jews constitute a minyan, which is not just a quorum for prayer, but a number that constitutes an Edah, a community of Jews. Wherever 10 Jews congregate, even if they are unaware of their holiness, even if they defile it, the divine presence, Shekhinah, which is also the Knesset Yisrael, the supernal community of Israel, dwells upon them.
Right. So just the presence of 10 Jews, even if they are not there to pray, 10 Jews at a soccer stadium, 10 Jews at a football stadium, anywhere you have 10 Jews, it enables the community of Jews then to be created and therefore for God's presence to be drawn down. Now, the idea of having 10 Jews together really is called, as mentioned here, an Edah. An Edah also, as the sages point out, Edah does not just mean congregation. Edah also comes from the word Yi'ud, which means designated. And what this really refers to is when you have 10 Jews, they have this designation as, oh, there's a group of Jews. Even the non-Jews will tell you, oh, there's a group of Jews there. That's a designation. Now, as Jews, we ought to represent God in this world as best as we can, or as the prophet says, or lagoim, we have to be a light unto the nations. Therefore, when we get together as 10, there's already a designation that is greater than us, that we don't even ourselves define. They're Jews there. And that in and of itself ought to propel us to behave as representatives of God, to self-abnegate ourselves, which is the theme here again, and then through that draw down His presence. Now, I just want to develop this idea because, of course, I mean, you can have 10 Jews and they do everything that is egotistic or everything selfish. I don't know if you've ever met Jews like that. I haven't. But sometimes you have 10 Jews that are not there to draw down God's presence. So God's presence is nonetheless drawn down, but of course it doesn't dwell. And that's the difference, just to point out what he said before, between having God there or letting God in. You can have someone there, but you don't let him in, right? Just like it is with a human being. Fine, you're part of my party, you're part of my social celebration here, but I'm not letting you in. I'm not connecting to you. Same with God. We can have, when 10 Jews, as we are told, 10 Jews get together, we draw down God's presence, but it's up to us then to let him in, to connect to him. Otherwise, it's almost a wasted opportunity. How do you do that? Again, through self-abnegation. That's
Rabbi, if I could just interject.
Yes,
does
please.
the number 10 refer to the 10 spies who were against or spoke against entering the land of Israel.
Right. That's right. So the very, very well said. How do we know that the number 10 constitutes an Edah, a congregation? From that episode, you're right. The Talmud points that out. From the episode of the 12 spies who were sent to explore the land of Israel, 10 of the 12 came back with negative reports and infused fear into our nation. God says to them, Ad matai la'edah ra'ah, until when this bad congregation is going to spew this venom. So God calls them an edah, and therefore we know that a group of 10 is thus called an edah. So it's a good point. You're right. A congregation.
Go ahead,
Just
Jordan.
that we have 10 participants. I'm looking at the Zoom here, so.
Oh, okay. There you
Perfect.
go.
We got a minion.
And hopefully we're letting God in. Thank you, Jordan, for pointing it out.
Yep.
Can I go back a step?
Sorry?
Can I go back a step?
Yes, you can go back. Yes.
I'm
Amy.
curious. Isn't God there all the time? Why do 10 of us have to get together to bring God down?
Oh, that's a good question.
I understand needing to let God in, but isn't God always there? What's the difference to getting 10 of us together?
Right. So
Good question.
I would say it's the difference between, you heard this example from Rav Steinsaltz, so I'm going to use it. It's like living in a school, right? We were all in school at one point in our lives. In the classroom, the aura of the school, the rules of the school existed. And we felt the presence of the principal, the presence of the teachers. We felt it. It was in the classroom. And therefore we behaved maybe sometimes better than we would do at home or in the streets. So God was there, or the principal was there, so to speak, in the classroom. But then you have the teacher entering the classroom, and then all of a sudden there's order, and that's drawing God in. So you're right, God is always there. God is always there. But when we are cognizant of that and nullify ourselves to that, self-abnegate ourselves, like he says here, then we're able to bring the teacher in the classroom, not just to have his aura in general hover upon us. So that I think is that was an example used by Rabbi Stein. So I think that comes to illustrate that. You're right, God is always there, but we have to bring him to the classroom. Now, by the way, sometimes, like he says, we bring him to the classroom, and still the students that are not behaving. And then it's up to them to say, okay, well, I recognize God is in the classroom. We brought him in. Now let me recalibrate. And so that's the idea.
Just one quick question or a comment and then feedback. I also heard that the 10 came from when Abraham was discussing with God whether God's going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And he said, if there are 10 righteous people, I won't.
Right. Yeah. I don't know if the word Edah is used then, congregation, but you're right. I mean, there's the idea of the number 10 there. And
We started off with number 50.
he was a good negotiator. He didn't win in the end, though, unfortunately. But yeah. But you're right. There's a number 10 over there too. Yeah. Now, there are psychological and also spiritual aspects to this number 10. I think the psychological one is that when you have a group of people together, you are almost forced to put your ego a little bit aside, because you have to recognize the presence of others. It's not just about you anymore. When you're alone in your room, or maybe even just with one other person, you can be focused fully on yourself. But all of a sudden you have people around you, you have to be a little bit focused on them too. So it immediately, psychologically, lowers the presence of your ego. So that in of itself
True.
is an invitation to God. That's a psychological aspect. The more you are with people, therefore, the more you subjugate your ego. The spiritual aspect to this is that when you have 10 people coming together, especially for God, so like in a minyan, we come together to pray, then we create not just a presence, an individual presence for God, but a collective presence for God. We almost say to God, yeah, please come dwell not just in our own personal lives, but come dwell in the congregation. Then we serve as representatives for the congregation, and we draw God's down, draw God's presence. We invite the teacher in the room, so to speak, for the entire classroom. Even if people in the classrooms are not even aware, but God came into the classroom, not just for me as an individual, but that's the power of the congregation, drawing down God for everybody. There's this image also that comes to mind, but one of the 10 miracles, as per the ethics of our fathers, that occurred in the temple was that when we came together, especially during the 3 festivals, Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot, it was very, very, very crowded. Now, the Mishnah depicts the scene as omdim tzfufin. They would stand like sardines, squashed. But a miracle occurred, and that is when they had to bow down to God. All of a sudden, they had room. They had room in front of them to bow down. If you squash like sardines, you can't bow down. But I know we can't try this in the COVID era. But if you go back to the pre-COVID era, sometimes you had, I don't know, like I said, stadiums where you squash, you can't bow down. So, but in the temple, there was a miracle. You could all of a sudden bow down. Now, the commentaries point out that this has a spiritual component to it. And that is that when you're standing as an ego, it's all about me. There's no room for the other. There's no room. You squashed. If it's about the other, if I'm able to bow down a little bit and say, okay, it's not about me. It's about that which is greater than me. Then all of a sudden you'll discover that there's room. And same here, when 10 people come together and they have to bow down a little bit, even psychologically as mentioned, because there are 10 people in the room, it's not just about you. Then all of a sudden there's more room for God. Then you can draw down God's presence because you're not that ego standing up and thinking that it's all about you. That's the idea that comes to mind, but certainly is relevant to God's presence being drawn down. Any comments?
Yes.
Oh,
Please.
So I think that
Amy.
I'm going to use the word loosely because I can't find a better word, but I think it's easier together. And
Say
I think
that
it's
again?
so I'm going to use the word easier loosely because I can't find a better word.
Yeah.
But I think it's easier together.
Oh, easier together.
Easier together. Just like a yoga practice. Anyone who's ever tried to create an individual practice, a home practice, it's a lot easier in a group where you have a guide to keep you on track. Like if you think of the order of service, like it's there to keep us focused. If you just try to meditate by yourself, your mind's going to wander. And so I think there's the group energy of coming together.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. Very, very well said. And by the way, let's give you some advertisements here. Amy's one of the best yoga teachers you'll ever meet. So when she talks about yoga, you listen.
Oh man, you sound like my husband. So now I've got 2 in my camp. That's awesome. And then my second point, that one about ego.
Yeah.
I was thinking, okay, not the synagogue I grew up in. Not the synagogue I grew up in. So the synagogue I grew up in was a very prestigious synagogue in Boston. And the front row seats cost more than the back row seats. And people sat by the door so they could watch the outfits and the bags, the hats, and the shoes coming in the door. It was like Fashion Week. It was like being on the runway. So, so somehow that was lost.
Right.
For many of the people sitting there, that was lost.
It's unfortunate. You're right. Right. Look, I'll to your 2 points. The first point, there's a beautiful expression in Talmud that when 2 people come to study together, then it's like 2 swords sharpening each other. So, and the cutting is easier. That's to point 1. To point 2, the image of the Lubavitcher Rebbe came to mind, but the Lubavitcher Rebbe, especially during these times, the high holidays, we would be inundated by requests and letters and please pray for me, and from all around the world, thousands. And he would go to pray for each and every person that asked him to pray for him or her at the grave of his father-in-law. Now he would pack all of these envelopes that he received from across the world in a big bag, and he refused for his assistant to carry that bag. You see pictures of him. If everyone in the office, you see pictures of him with these huge, big brown bags, because he would say these letters are meant for me, and I have to carry them. There was no ego about him. I'm the Lubavitch Rebbe. I therefore should have 20 assistants carrying all my stuff and meet me there. No, that personal touch, that real connection, is what enables self-abnegation. Self-abnegation enables that real connection. It's a two-way street. And sometimes it's missing, you're right. Not just in synagogues, other places too. Yeah.
I'll give my father's experience. And, he was busy working when we were growing up. And when he retired, he got a little bit more involved in the synagogue. And one of the things, one, he was on the minyan list. So when they needed another body, he, would rush over there, fill the minyan. But then over time, I think there was like once a week that he basically, like Thursday mornings, he committed to be in services, or it was his job to pick up the bagels on the way. But he talked about the value of regular, and then the value to the community that showed up regularly, that they could welcome the one that walked in that wasn't there regularly, because they all recognized that somebody new was here.
Right. Beautiful.
So it's just interesting that it's like there's a value, and it's the same yogic consistency that you and I have talked about.
Right. Okay, beautiful.
I think there's something to that too.
Right. Very nice. Very nice. I hope we can achieve that at CBT. We're all in this together. But thank you for that example. Just one more thing about the number.
Sorry, and same synagogue.
Sorry?
Same synagogue.
Same synagogue.
The same synagogue. So right where I said you had all ego on one end, that same experience was in the same synagogue. Interesting, in their small chapel, not in their large space.
Right. Right.
Yeah, same place.
He did that in the same synagogue. Very nice. I'm saying at CBT year, Congregation Bet Tefillah, I hope we can achieve the opposite and really be a community, as we often say, of leaders who lead the way in welcoming and love and in connection. All right. I just want to mention one more thing about the number 10, which comes to mind. That's an important thing to mention, because the Kabbalah mentions it quite often. See, the number 10 in Hebrew, the numerical value of the letter that represents the numerical value of 10 in Hebrew is the letter Yud. Yud. Every letter, the art of gematria, every letter has a different numerical value in Hebrew. The Yud is the number 10. Yud is also the first letter of God's name. Yud. Sometimes you see God spelled as Yud in some prayer books. Yud. Yud is the number 10. Now, why is that? Again, referring to this idea that when 10 people get together, they draw down this Yud, this first letter of the name of Hashem. Now, what's important to mention is that we just draw down the first letter. The rest is up to us. The Hey is the letter in which God really feels comfortable, so to speak, where his presence. Hey is a larger letter. It's more present, and therefore it represents God's dwelling. That Hey that follows the Yud. So 10 people is the first step. You drew down the Yud. But then if you want God to really feel comfortable, then you have to really abnegate yourself to God. So it's just important to note this. The Yud is the first step, but not the last step.
What is the Vav?
The Vav, that's a good question. So the Vav is the ultimate drawing down. That's why it's a long letter. It's almost like a bridge. And then the Hey is the final dwelling. The final Hey, right? Yud, Hey, Vav, Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey. These are the full letters of the name of God. The Yud represents the first connection, that spark. And that, again, is ignited by 10 people getting together. Then we have to let God in. That's the Hey. Bring the teacher inside the classroom. And then we have to make sure that it doesn't stay in the classroom, but we draw down after we've experienced God and God's dwelling. We have to bring him to the world. So we have to take him and with a Vav, bring him to every sphere of our world. And after we've done so, then we can say there's a Hey, then there's the final Hey, then God is truly present everywhere.
And those letters also, Haya, Hoveh, Ve'yehiyeh, the past, future, and present.
Right.
those same letters.
Very good. That's right. Those letters of the name of God also allude to past, present, and future. Hayah, Vev, Yeh. All these three words for past, present, and future are embedded in the Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey. You're right, because God is eternal. God is in the past, God is in the present, and God is in the future. Good. Right. Thank you for that, William. Okay. Let's maybe continue a little bit more, unless there's other comments and ideas.
Okay, one more. You must be thinking,
Yes,
what did
go
she
for it,
eat last night? What did she
You're on
eat last
fire
night?
today.
What did she eat last night? It's also the 10 makes it not about me. So the reason you have to show up for everybody else.
Right.
Right.
That's
Right,
right.
like
That's what I said. The psychological impact. That's correct. Yeah.
That it's not all about me. Like I can wake up in the morning and think, oh, I don't really feel like it today.
Right.
Other people are counted on me, so I got to be there.
That's right.
And usually when you get there, then you feel like it.
You're right. And then you're right. Once you come to Minyan, you don't regret it. No one has regretted coming to Minyan, even though I've forced quite a few people.
Yeah.
Many times, unfortunately, because we've had to. I encourage everyone to come to Minyan. But you're right. You're right. Yes, Rabbi Eisen.
You're on mute.
So just to tag on to what you just said, I was always taught when you count in a minyan, you count not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4. You don't go 1, 2, 3, 4. There are a lot of reasons for that, but that idea of having to be there, it's not about you, it's about the whole. Another thing is, we live in a base 10 society. So in many ways, a unit of 10 reflects a certain feeling of maybe wholeness or completeness. And that's why God's there. It's one of the building blocks of the world as we know it. The last thing is the other way to count, I was taught, is you walk into a shul, you say Matovu, right? To sort of set the context. So what's the next line? Va'ani barov chasecha vo vetecha shechava el hechal kachecha biratecha. That line, there are 10 words, and you assign one for each person. And it basically says, I've come into this place to serve you. It's not about me. Right. So the 10 sort of, again, the idea of completeness, and that we're only complete insofar as we're part of that 10.
Yeah, beautifully said. Beautifully
Thought.
said. Thank you for taking us in that direction, Rabbi Eisen. It's true because reminds us of the biblical episode. I mean, there's an episode like that. God didn't want us to count human beings. Never. In fact, King David's army were counted as human beings. They didn't say not 1, not 2, but they said 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And as some of you may know, a plague burst out, and unfortunately, many people were killed. I don't know if it was the COVID-19 plague then or not, but the plague burst out. The counting, because they counted bodies instead of saying not 1. We don't count bodies in Judaism. Why? Because we've always realized that our value is not in our bodies. Our value is not in what we do to exist. Our value is in what we do to benefit, to give. That's why when God did instruct the Jewish people to be counted, for example, with Moses, God says the way you'll count them is that you'll ask each and every one of them to bring a half a shekel. Now, why? Because God is saying you're only worth what you're giving. If you give something, then you're worth something, then I can count you. If you think I can count you, if you think you're valuable just because you exist, just because you're a body, then you're wrong. That's the wrong way to count people. There's no value in it. The only value a human being is in what he or she gives. Give a half a shekel, I'll count you. Now, by the way, it's only a half a shekel. I think we mentioned this before. Only a half a shekel, because God is saying to us also that yes, you're worth something when you give, but you're only worth a half. Why? Because when you join your half with someone else, then I can call you a whole. If your half joins another half, then you're one. If you gave and then you went back to your corner and the only thing you gave was giving without wanting to connect, then really you're just worth a half. But when my half joins another half, then I'm really connecting with someone else, and together we're drawing down God's presence and creating an impact in this world. Then we're worth a whole. That's really the idea. And I think,
Just
by
a
the way,
comment on the counting. This week was Shabbos Tshuva.
Yeah, yesterday.
And
Yeah.
yesterday. And I belong to a synagogue here in Toronto that is the largest conservative synagogue in Canada, if not North America.
Mm.
And I've gone to synagogue ever since they reopened, with very, very strict mandates of mask wearing. It's a mandate. It's not recommended, it's mandated.
Mm-hmm.
And except for a time that I was away visiting my daughter in Edmonton, her family. Yesterday was the first time that there were more than 10 men in the synagogue on a Shabbat.
Mm.
Previously to that, and I count with numbers, 1, 2, 3, not. Previously to yesterday, there was never more than 10 men. And we are in an egalitarian synagogue where women are counted. And with women, they make the minyan. They have made the minyan every Shabbat.
Wonderful. Wonderful. But again, the presence of 10. So not one. I just wanted to add that, you know, there's a midrash that speaks about the 2 seas of Israel. And the 2 seas of Israel, as you may know, I mean, excluding the Mediterranean Sea, is the Sea of the Kinneret up north and the sea down below. That's called the Dead Sea. Now, why is one sea called dead? And that's because that sea only takes, it doesn't give. You only take and you don't give. It doesn't give water to the, I mean, now the Israelis are geniuses, so they make money off the mud of the Dead Sea and maybe other things, but it doesn't really give any water. The sea up north takes water and gives, so it's a very living sea. But the sea down below is a dead sea because it only takes, it doesn't give. And that's been really the message of Judaism forever. I think that's why Jews have become, really, if you think about this, obsessed with giving. We are obsessed with giving. I mean, unfortunately, sometimes we give to the wrong places, but we're still obsessed with giving. Wherever you go, whether it's a cancer research center or an animal safety shelter or whatever it may be, you'll see a Jewish name there. And you may think, you know, that, oh, there's so many Jews in this world. There are. The number of Jews in this world is less than the statistical error in the Chinese census, according to David Himmelfarm, an American Jewish writer. We're about 13 million, 14 million Jews. But it seems like there's so many of them because we like to give. We understood that giving is living. Without giving, you don't really live. Now, what does it mean to give? To give really means exactly what we're talking about, to abnegate yourself. It's not about you. It's about the other, what I can do for the other. Me by myself, not worth anything. Once I start giving, then I'm worth a half. And then when I join my half with someone else's half, then I become wholesome.